Why should Chile or Latin America even be on the radar?
I find the United States, in my experience, relatively challenging due to patriotism, very large local supplier. For Australian exporters, in my humble opinion, over the couple of decades, the easier markets to enter would be Latin America and Canada.
Today we're joined by Steve Hall, Business Development Manager at Hofmann Engineering Chile and a senior commercial leader with many years of experience working between Australia and Chile in the mining sector. Steve began his career in the technology and R&D space as country manager for the University of Queensland, working closely with research teams and future industry leaders developing new technologies. That experience quickly highlighted the opportunity for Australian technology and services to support the Chilean mining industry. Since then, Steve has spent decades building commercial bridges between Australia and Latin America. He previously held senior leadership roles at Trade International, including serving as Chief Operating Officer, working with operations across Europe, North America, and Africa. He also spent 12 years on the board of the Australian Latin America Business Council, helping strengthen ties between the two regions.
In the last decade, the intensity of competition has increased. That's where companies such as yours or other corporate advisors can provide detailed knowledge.
Is it realistically to deploy from Australia, or do you need boots on the ground?
I think the Chilean companies, your market companies, have grown to expect the local representation. Perhaps 20 years ago, from afar was possible for some minor entry points. Local representation is necessary, supported by regular expat visits, or an expat based in country would be even more powerful.
In the past, if you have done something different commercially, what would you have done different?
I think most Australian companies have gone rather well here in Latin America, Chile in particular. It's a pretty good country to do business in, and I'd encourage Australian METS companies to participate in the market if they haven't already.
In your experience, what are some of the biggest cultural differences in doing business between Australia and Chile?
Well, firstly, Diego, I'd like to just say that there are many similarities. So before we talk about differences, I'd like to highlight the similarities and why Australians feel very welcome and adapted into the Chilean market. Like Australians, Chileans are very sports fanatics, work-orientated, family-orientated, pet lovers. I think I already mentioned work. High work ethic, I was trying to say.
With lovers, they're very similar to Chileans.
And but we're also political skeptics, for example. We love humor, double meaning, sarcasm, irony. So even though the languages are different, the culture behind that, the cultural similarities are there. The differences are not so great. It's a more stratified society, as we know. Also, I would feel that the university and school connections are stronger and are more permanent than Australia. Depending on which school you went to or which university in Australia, it's more about what qualification you have and how you've put that to technical use or corporate use, and not so much which actual university you went to, whereas here it's quite important. And the other significant cultural difference I would comment on is the level of patriotism. If we look at Chilean National Day on 18 of September, it's like a whole week of celebration.
Week.
They go crazy. Australia Day on 26th of January is an important event, but it's not on the same level. So the level of patriotism to the flag, to the nation, I think is stronger here.
That's very interesting. So for Australian METS companies, why should Chile or Latin America even be on the radar?
Yeah. Firstly, they're large markets, as we know, in commodities that Australians are relatively comfortable with, particular copper, lithium, molybdenum, iron ore. So the knowledge of industry practices and corporate structures is very useful. And I would say that for Australian exporters, in my humble opinion, over the couple of decades, the easier markets to enter would be Latin America and Canada. After that, there are increasing levels of difficulty as you go to Middle East, Africa, CIS, Russia before the sanctions.
Interesting.
And surprisingly, as I commented in the pre-interview discussions, I find the United States, in my experience, relatively challenging due to patriotism, very large local suppliers such as Caterpillar and many, many other corporates. So in first step, it's relatively, by degree of difficulty, doable, as the Australians would say. Coming within Latin America, it's not one homogeneous market, as many other interviewers would have probably told you. They have subtle differences. And certainly I would say Brazil is significantly more challenging than the Spanish-speaking part of the continent. And the main three that Australians concentrate on would be Chile, Peru and Argentina, often using Chile as their launching pad, which is not a bad strategy, but just understanding that there are differences between the countries.
Great. And from your perspective, what are the biggest differences in how mining companies operate or make decisions in Chile compared to Australia?
Well, at a high level, many of them are global players, and so whether it's a BHP or Rio Tinto or an SQM or an AMSA, they have similar global practices which would be recognised, and those same corporate norms exist throughout the world. However, the specifics in Chile, generally one would find higher levels of staffing, therefore greater organisational depth and complexity to deal with and to negotiate with. That can, in some companies, be more bureaucratic, particularly in the semi-estatal, the state-related companies. Also, because the legal system is different, the supplier registration and approval process is more arduous and strict, and that is often administered through supply portals and various applications, whether it's SAP Ariba or Unilinks or others. So those portals become very important through which to supply. But at the same time, Australian and Latin American markets have the same high environmental standards, anti-corruption standards, security and health and safety training, and the priority for gender equalisation are also similar with minor differences. I mean, Chile particularly is doing quite well. I understand we're about 25% female participation here, which I think is similar, and that's risen very quickly from 5 to 10. The other mining company difference here, I would say, Diego, is that the tyranny of distance is slightly less in Chile. That whilst it's a long, narrow country and you have a couple of thousand kilometres, it's in one direction up and down, whereas Australia has greater distance to reach all of the mines in the Pilbara or South Australia or Northern Territory, Papua New Guinea, Queensland, New South Wales. So the tyranny of distance is slightly more manageable here.
I understand. And this is very important for companies because one of the things we want to do is help them to establish and operate in the country, eventually to scale. And is it realistically to deploy from Australia, or do you need boots on the ground?
Yeah. I think the Chilean companies, your market companies, have grown to expect the local representation. Perhaps 20 years ago, from afar was possible for some minor entry points. But local representation is necessary, supported by regular expat visits, or an expat based in country would be even more powerful. And quite a number of Australian companies still have that, even though the industry is becoming increasingly localised. The past 20 years have seen a very strong growth of the professional class in Chile, both on the mining side and on the supply side, or the met sector as we would call it in Chile. So much so that not only are we bringing technologies into Chile from Australia, Canada and other places, but Chilean companies have developed their own technologies which are now being exported back to Australia and to other niche markets of the world. This has led to an increasing intensity of competition across the market on the supply side, which also therefore mandates more local representation, more local presence, more regular visits, more participation in trade shows wherever possible. And there's a reasonable plethora of those in Chile. As below the classic Expo Min and Expo Nor, there are a number of others which we won't go into detail, but more regional shows or more technical specific shows where Australians participate and receive very good feedback for their technology and their participation.
What mistakes do foreign companies most frequently make when trying to enter the Chilean market?
Because it's such a vast market, and many entrepreneurs in Australia feel they have the magical solution, it sometimes looks like a solution in search of a problem. But by turning it around, I believe the approach should be more study the market, identify the real problems as seen, perceived and felt by the customer, and then try and customize your solution towards that. That good market research will identify local competitors, local collaborators, and potentially agents and distributors. The challenge there is to avoid choosing an agent who doesn't create a good fit, who doesn't put in sufficient effort, who doesn't travel the country well enough, or expects that if he can sit in an office or a warehouse in Santiago and distribute a product. I think the market is much more demanding than that nowadays.
Interesting. And I believe there's probably more, but if you can think of 3 steps to recommend a Australian METS company thinking of entering Chile, what would it be?
Yeah. I think the first one, as many companies do, is to make multiple visits to the region. Certainly more than once. Participate in relevant trade shows, as we've discussed a moment ago. Going down to the next level here, as I've touched on the topic, but making a very detailed competitor analysis of what exists in this market, because in the last decade, the intensity of competition has increased. Multinationals have become strong and agglomerated many of the smaller brands. Australian companies that came here 10 or 20 years ago have all been gathered up into global conglomerates. I was making a bit of a list in my preparation for this to just think back what's happened in the last 20 years, where names that we once recognised have now become corporatised into other globals, such as Ludowici, Scanalyze, Comsteel, which is Demolicop, Bradken, which is now part of Hitachi, Mincom, RCT, I think I went to Epiroc, Rangi, RCT, which went to Caterpillar recently, Micromine went to Weir Global, Otraco as part of Bridgestone, Bus Movement Technology, BMT were very big in their day. They were taken over as well. So that there's been this huge change in the competitive landscape. So that competitor analysis that I've mentioned is warrants multiple visits and a great deal of depth. That's where companies such as yours or other corporate advisors can provide detailed knowledge that you can't pick up in the restaurant or the pub or at the airport or lounge. You will also find in that competitor analysis that during these 10 years, competitors have arrived from China, Canada, US, India, many other parts of the world, Europe, of course, I should have mentioned there, as well as other Aussies. So that an Australian company here, or any other nationality for that matter, will find some of their compatriots very close to their niche, if not on top of it. So you're actually competing in some parts with other companies with their own patriotic brand. As I've mentioned, seeking that advice from legal and commercial advisors such as yourselves or Plus Mining, from Austrade, Trade and Investment Queensland. There are a number of umbrella organisations. Global Victoria also have a very capable group in this region. Identifying your market approach, not just for Chile but for the adjacent countries, which are easily complementary markets but subtly different and need slightly different channels.
Great. And in your experience, how long does it realistically take to gain traction?
Difficult question to give a straight answer. It somewhat depends on the product. If there's a safety priority, for example, I can remember Bradken A&I had a very easy start with the fact that there were safety problems to be solved around seismic events, rock bursts and fatalities. Mm-hmm. So that gave an immense impetus to bring cable bolts, rock reinforcement, friction bolts, geo-instrumentation, software, overcoring and CSRO and other consulting services from the universities to address that problem. So that made it pretty rapid. We're still going 20 years later, by the way. Not every problem has been solved. In summary answer, I think those multiple visits, market analysis, it would be reasonable to allow at least 6 months for that. Mm-hmm. And a year would then take you through the cycle of the trade shows that I mentioned earlier, so that you have Expo Me in 1 year and Expo Nor the other, as well as the more regional ones.
So 6 to test the market?
6 to 12 months.
6 to 12 months, mm-hmm. And then to gain some traction?
You should be gaining traction at that point, not just a blank study. And then you decide what to do. I think the decisions would be concurrent with that, just to invest travel, time, office, perhaps at some point local staffing through a recruitment process. There's a lot of poaching of staff across the industry, just like in Australia, so there'll be capable people across the industry. You just mm-hmm. need to find the target and see if you can incentivate him to come to your company. Often a new technology from Australia is new and exciting and will automatically attract good professionals. And they will expect to be taken to Australia and trained adequately in the technology, as you would need to do anyway, as well as the expat visits here, and then getting onto the mines. Getting onto the mines for direct presentations is becoming more and more complicated, not just because of security pass and health requirements to get to altitude of 3, 4 and 4,500 metres where strict health guidelines are required. But after the pandemic, more virtual meetings have been held. So if it's a product that needs a direct approach on mine, there can be additional complexities of getting on mine, getting access to the people that you need during the intensities of their shift rotation and the high productivity environment in which they work. Yeah. And most of that's in the north. There are some underground mines near San Diego and Los Bronces and Dina open pits, but the majority would be in the Antofagasta or Iquique area.
Right. Interesting. In the past, if you would have done something different commercially, what would you have done different?
I think I've discussed much to the positive side. I'm not able to share too many war stories. I think most Australian companies have gone rather well here in Latin America, Chile in particular. My concepts and theories and ideas that I've presented today, just one man's point of view of how that can be done, and it's not a monopoly point of view. Others may have found better, faster and more efficient ways to do it. Dealing with the legal complexity, the bureaucracy of the mining companies and their supply portals, and get the challenges of getting on site at high altitude, they can all be managed. So there's nothing that I can highlight as a big no-no, a big avoid area, or a big red cross that jumps to mind. It's a pretty good country to do business in. San Diego, as you know, is a great urban metropolis, quite comfortable for both expats and locals to live, so you have all the support services that you need here. The regional cities have also grown enormously. Antofagasta, the epicenter of the copper industry, is now approaching 1 million people. It's almost unrecognisable compared to what it was 20 years ago. Wow. It's actually almost 30 since Escondida was started. And now we find Escondida producing as much copper as the entire 6 divisions of Codelco. So, and in Antofagasta there are many, many other mining companies and complexes between Antofagasta and Copiapó. So that the opportunities are vast, and I'd encourage Australian METs companies to participate in the market if they haven't already.
Great. Well, that was the end of the interview. I would like to say thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again very soon.
It's a pleasure, and be happy to take any one-to-one discussions that your clients might need.
Absolutely.
Thanks.